I'm making sunshine for the journey. I'm making sunshine for the journey. I'm making sunshine for the journey. And I am making it right now. Hey, everybody. Today we have another Sunshine for the Journey episode just for parents. The Ready, Set, Go show has many episodes which have been created for young kids and the big people in their life. They are filled with stories, songs, interviews, and ideas for indoor and outdoor activities. In fact, my guest today, David, loves to sail, and he helped me create a podcast for kids where he tells all about his lifelong hobby. It's also helpful for adult listeners to hear from people who have long-term perspective on the early years with their own children. David is both a parent and a grandparent, which has given him even greater insight into raising the next generation. It is all too easy to get stressed out by situations close to home, sometimes even in our own home, and also out in the world. So this is a place for us to reflect on what went right despite everything. Hi, David.
Hi, Miss Katie.
What did you like to do as a child?
I really liked sailing when I was a young boy, Miss Katie. It was something that I could do by myself or with friends or with family. And it offered the excitement of being on the water and that rocking back and forth in the waves, feeling the wind on my skin and in my hair, watching the sunlight flicker off the surface of the lake. I really cherished those times. It also offered a sense of adventure and a chance to explore new things and places. And as a result, it created opportunities for me to connect with other people and new people and bond with family and friends through these shared experiences. It also allowed a chance to connect with something bigger than myself that might be represented by Mother Nature. So doing that helped me to learn some skills, including self-confidence and a sense of responsibility, because it allowed me to put my problem-solving skills to practice. It allowed me to build resilience by teaching me to meet these ever-changing conditions of being out on the water. And thankfully, it's something I've been able to enjoy throughout my life and to share with my family. And that's because one is never too old to enjoy sailing, nor is it limited by physical ability. Plus, if you live where I do, even in the wintertime, we can still sail ice boats on the lake when it freezes over.
Oh my gosh, that sounds incredible. So did you pass your love of sailing on to your own children?
Yes, I did. Although my children are adults now, I am truly fortunate that I was able to share this with them. So they grew up sailing and the sport of sailboat racing that I've come to get so much enjoyment from. And it certainly didn't hurt that I grew up with friends who also love sailing. As a matter of fact, my wife and I first met during sailing school when she was 6 years old and I was 8 years old. And our children attended that very same sailing school on the very same lake when they were the very same ages as my wife and I were. So we've been able to share our love of sailing with our children and hopefully soon with our grandson. So it's not only a part of our legacy that we've been able to pass on to our children, but it's also something we can all still do together. And I'm grateful that both of my children and my daughter-in-law are involved in sailing and sailboat racing even today.
Wow, that's really special. What are some of your favorite memories when your kids were young?
My favorite memories of when my kids were young were those times when we were all together and we were all available and present for one another. Now, as a kid, that's really easy to do as you're unencumbered by many of the stresses that the world offers, but it's not always easy to do when the pressures of earning a living and raising a family are seemingly ever present. So those special times typically involved being in, on, or near the water. And as a matter of interest to you and your listeners, there's actually a science and research on the benefits of being near the water called Blue Mind science. And we were practicing Blue Mind before it was even researched. So whether we were swimming in the lake in the summertime or in the hotel pool in the winter, whether we were sailing together in a small dinghy on a local lake or a large bareboat catamaran in the Virgin Islands, or even if we were ice skating or ice fishing or sitting around the fire pit next to the frozen lake, it was those times where our ability to be consciously present in the moment allowed for things to be slowed down just enough so that the only things that mattered were those that were right in front of us, each other. And when those times included the family I grew up in and my wife's family, they were extra special. So I cherish those times, and I still look for opportunities like that today to engage with loved ones in that manner.
Well, I understand you were adopted as a baby. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I can. Yes, I was adopted. Although the way I prefer to describe it is that I was first relinquished or given up by my genetic parents. And then second, I was adopted or placed with my adoptive parents. And I describe it that way because the term adopted, generally as used in society today, recognizes that event of being placed in another home or another family, but it oftentimes doesn't describe the event of being relinquished. And it's been my experience that it's important to acknowledge that event. So both events can have separate and combined lasting impacts on a person throughout their lives. So specifically what that meant in my family was that my adoptive parents were told that they'd be unable to conceive children, so they sought to adopt a child. And they went through a very difficult process of being vetted and interviewed and waiting many years before being permitted to adopt a child. And I was the first in their home. And I was raised in a very supportive, loving family and was very fortunate to never have wanted for anything from basic necessities to live to the resources that were necessary to succeed. And fatefully, my parents conceived a child against all odds after I came along. And my little sister was born 2 years after my adoption. And then 5 years after that, my parents adopted my brother from another family altogether.
What do you want parents to know about adoption?
Wow. Thanks for the opportunity to make a few suggestions. That question isn't always asked. So first and foremost, I'd really like people to understand that although adoptees seem like a small group of people, they represent, as a matter of fact, only 2% of the U.S. population. But that means that we're a vast number of people. That means that there are 7 million U.S. adults and children who have been placed for adoption. But maybe even more significantly, a big portion of Americans have personal adoption connections. And it's estimated that 6 in 10 people know someone who's directly involved in adoption. And that's a huge number of people. It's over 200 million of us who have had some exposure personally to adoption. So we share that experience, though we don't always acknowledge that. Second, what I'd like to share is that I'd appreciate it if people understood that adoption can sometimes be very confusing, especially to the adopted children themselves. So being an adoptee can involve feelings of both happiness and sadness, often at the same time, which contributes to that confusion. So being an adopted child can produce many complex emotions, not the least of which are those emotions that come from imagining the circumstances that could cause one's first parents to relinquish a child. And it feels really personal to have been given up by your ancestors. And oftentimes there's not an explanation for that. So some big emotions are felt as a result of that. And lastly, I would hope that people, knowing what they know today, can acknowledge that, yes, adoption can be very beneficial to many parties, yet it often involves grief and loss. And that loss involves a separation from one's family of origin. Plus, there's an expectation that the child will attach to the family that he or she is adopted into. And neither of these events are really easy to resolve, and they involve sometimes lots of needed support for all members exposed to this. So both relinquishment and adoption experiences can affect the person in different ways throughout their lives.
So what is something you wish adults around you knew at the time when you were a child?
Wow, another great question. My parents, in particular, I believe did the absolute best that they could. Yet they didn't know then what we know now. And I wish my parents knew that at times I was struggling. I wish they also knew that I was ashamed to tell them that something felt wrong, right? I was expected to be grateful that I was adopted into this family, and I didn't have the capacity to tell them not everything is great here. So society teaches that lesson, and people outside of my family taught that lesson. My parents didn't, but I was taught that I should be grateful for being adopted. And when I didn't always feel that way, because I had these big feelings of confusion and hurt and disconnection from having been relinquished, I didn't really, as a young person, have that ability to identify these feelings, let alone have the vocabulary to talk about these feelings. So I wish my parents and adults knew that society's expectation for me to pretend that everything was okay And to be grateful for having been taken in was a lot of pressure to put on a child, especially one who didn't feel all that grateful sometimes because he was given up before he was adopted. And ultimately, I wish adults and parents knew that although things looked like they were okay, they might not have always been okay. And that only they, as my parents, had the opportunity to try to surface the reasons for this with me. Now, I mentioned that they didn't know these things. We've learned a lot since that time. We know things today that my parents didn't know at the time. And we know now that parents should tell their children about relinquishment and adoption from a very early age. And they should do so using simple and positive and honest language by having these conversations early and building trust and acknowledging both the adoption and the relinquishment to make it a normal part of the family story. And of course, that should be done in developmentally and age-appropriate ways over time. And of course, we should be reassuring the child of our love and that they belong, that the child is loved unconditionally, and we as parents and adults have their backs no matter what.
Well, some of our listeners might have friends who have children who have been adopted. What do you suggest that they tell their own children to help them understand?
I would empathize with those families and those children, and I would do what I could to normalize the fact that although we'd like to, we can't teach our children everything they need to know. And if you're like most people, we may wait to teach things as they come up naturally. Yet sometimes other people in society send messages to our children that we and maybe even the children are unaware of. For example, it's not unusual for children and adults from non-adopted families to make assumptions about adopted children and adopted families. One of those assumptions was that the child was abandoned and maybe there's something wrong with them or wrong with their family as a result. And that isn't always true. So there are some things we need to talk about proactively, and adoption is one that I would suggest that parents talk about. So talk about it early, talk about it often, and describe to them different types of adoption. We hear about some of those in popular culture, but do we really understand them? There are lots of different ways to adopt children. And domestic adoption is done through an agency or done privately between families. Kinship adoption is when a relative takes over the care of a child and adopts them. Children and teenagers can be adopted from foster care, where those children were removed from their original homes due to some safety concerns and now need a place to live. There's interracial adoption, where children are adopted from another country, and there's transracial adoption, where the children have a different racial heritage than their parents might have. So talk about these things, educate on these things, and while doing so, use some really positive language, right? Don't fall into that trap where we're looking at adoptive children and families as different, as something to fear. So describe instead adopted children as being loved, not as being lucky, right? They're just loved. And describe them as being challenged by circumstances, not as abandoned and flawed. And remind our children that they're just like us. They've just had some different experiences. And lastly, I'd encourage adults to teach their children to respect private stories. Yes, it's okay to ask questions of adoptees and their families, and it's okay if those adoptees and families might not want to answer. It's their story to tell if and when they want to.
Well, those are really good ideas. Thank you. And do you have any advice for parents who have adopted children?
I do. The short answer to that really important question is that although separated and adopted and fostered children often look like they're okay, and they look like they're leading similar lives to non-adopted persons, they can experience circumstances that need to be overcome that oftentimes are not easy or natural to talk about as a child. And those circumstances could be that loss and that grief that they talked about. Sometimes individuals struggle developing their identities because they don't have any genetic relatives to mirror from. Sometimes they have low self-esteem because they're uncertain of who they really are because they have no information of to whom they descended. And oftentimes there's a lack of information about medical background because we don't have access to that information if an adoption is finalized, or we don't have information about any mental health or addiction predispositions that might be important for the child and the family to know. And of course, these issues should be explored by parents with their children in developmentally appropriate ways. And today, there are many resources that exist to accomplish that.
So do you have some resources you'd like to share?
I'd love to. Yeah, the great news today is that we know more about these experiences and their outcomes than we ever have. And although COVID was horrific and it negatively impacted us in so many ways, one thing it did do that was positive is it brought the adoption community together virtually from all corners of our country and beyond. So if one lives somewhere, they might not ever meet another adoptee, depending if they're in a rural area or not. Now, there are big communities of individuals where once it was difficult to connect, these online communities have sprouted up and they provide resources and support, and they're still growing. One of the greatest, most comprehensive information resources for individuals, whether they're affected by adoption or not, is titled the Ultimate Adoption Resource Guide. And that's available at a link that I can provide to you for your show notes if you'd like. If your family or an adoptee or someone you know is affected by substance abuse, I'd recommend either or both books that I've written. One is a memoir where I've talked about my experiences. It's called Parallel Universes, The Story of Rebirth. And the other is a monograph that's entitled Relinquishment and Addiction, What Trauma Has to Do with That. And they're both readily available on Amazon and elsewhere. And ultimately, since you asked, what I'd like to offer are words of support to those who are affected by this relinquishment and adoption experience. Any of the 200 million of us who have a connection to adoption, and that is this: healing from relinquishment and adoption happens every day. Both grief and love can coexist at the same time. And although healing can, for some, be a lifelong process that involves acknowledging that loss and trauma, finding support and connection with others who understand these experiences can lead to peace and a really strong sense of self that can help individuals going forward. And again, there are lots of support communities available today to connect with that can help people do just that.
Well, those are all great ideas. Well, I know you're a grandparent now. Can you tell us a little bit about that experience?
I sure can. Becoming a grandfather has been everything I imagined it would be, and of course, so much more. And you and your listeners might imagine, because I experienced some of these relinquishment and adoption experiences myself, my grandson's arrival seems like, in a really small way, a culmination of my own search for identity, because his present roots me in a reality that's so solid that I can't imagine ever struggling again. I mean, he grounds me in a way that is profound. So when I hold him in my arms, I'm filled with this profound sense of gratitude. I'm grateful that I'm in a time and place where I can be fully present for him. And that's a reference to when you asked me earlier, what were the greatest times with my family? Well, when we were present for each other. And I find myself spending hours simply being with him and soaking in his smile and his cooing and trying to make words. And in every moment that we're together, and that time feels like a precious gift, one that I'm ready and eager to embrace with open arms, yet, of course, never seem to get enough of. But when I'm caring for my grandson, and I have the opportunity to do that frequently, I oftentimes take the first time in the morning shift when it's just him and me. I feel this overwhelming sense of, I guess I'd call it like a humble competence, and maybe even some wisdom, right? That feeling that I didn't have when I was initially a father, especially with my first child, right? I remember that uncertainty, and I remember the second guessing, and I remember the fear that I might not get it right. And when my kids are older, well, I wasn't always able to be as present for them as I would have liked to be because of that busyness of life. But now, as a grandfather, I'm in a different place. There's calm. There's knowing that I'm solid and that others can count on me in profound ways because I know I can count on myself. And I've seen a few things and been through a few things. There's that quiet confidence I referred to that comes from those experiences, from having lived through some early days of parenting and learning so much along the way. And there's so much value in having investigated my own upbringing and my perceptions of what that might be informing in terms of behaviors later in life. So being present as I am more at ease now, more attuned to the rhythm of my grandson's needs. And, it's amazing, but it was intuitive. I know how to cradle him just so. I know how to soothe his cries with a gentle hum or a soft touch. I It's as if I'm rediscovering a part of myself I didn't even know existed back in my earlier days, but even when I was parenting in the beginning. And that feels really steady and secure. And it shows in the trust my grandson has in me, but also the trust my son and his wife have in me. I've been told that I am, quote unquote, crushing it in terms of caring for my grandson, which is a profound compliment in this day and age. And I'm actually compared to other parents of their contemporaries, and none of them seem to hold a candle to me. So I'm really honored to be in that place in my life today.
Oh, that's incredible. So do you have any other advice for parents with babies or young children?
Well, I'm certainly no expert, but I would suggest that parents do exactly what we've talked about, to find those moments and manifest them if necessary, where they're filled with that hope and wonder and, maybe non-agendaed time, right? To look for opportunities to just be steady presences in our children's lives, to share with them not only stories of where they came from, but also the challenges that we and our families have overcome that have allowed us to be here today. Those lessons of resilience, the lessons of love, the power of family, and the way that love and family can transcend the fractures of the past and will survive the trials of the future.
Is there anything else you'd like to share?
I'd like to express my gratitude and my thanks to all of those who have been a really supportive part of my journey in my life, and including those genetic family members who have accepted me and embraced me and affirmed me.
Well, thank you so much for sharing part of your story with us today, David.
Thanks for having me, Miss Katie. It's been my honor connecting with you today.
And thank you to all who are listening today. This past summer, I went to a restaurant named Sonder. The definition was written out right on the door under the name. It means the realization that each passerby has a life as vivid and complex as your own. That sure is true for every other parent, grandparent, and child, too. We can't know all the things that people are carrying in their hearts and minds, but no matter what, we can do our best to make some sunshine for our own journey and add rays of sunshine to other people's lives, whether they are family, friends, or people we come in contact with as we go about our day. Shine on, friends. I'm making sunshine for the journey. I'm making sunshine for the journey. I'm making sunshine for the journey. And I am making it right now. And then I watch the news and think, well, where do I even begin? And then I think again, if not me, who? And if not now, when? If not me, who? And if not now, when? So I'm gonna put one foot in front of the other, one foot. I'm gonna put one foot in front of the other, one foot. I'm gonna put one foot in front of the other, one foot. Yes, and I'll be on my way. Yes, I'll be on my way.
How you gonna make sunshine?
I'm going to open my mind. Do what makes me smile inside. Then I'll share my smile with you. And like a wave, it will reach others too. I'm gonna put one foot in front of the other, one foot. I'm gonna put one foot in front of the other, one foot. I'm gonna put one foot in front of the other, one foot. Yes, and I'll be on my way. Yes, I'll be on my way. And I'm making sunshine for the journey. I'm making sunshine for the journey. I'm making sunshine for the journey. And I am making it right now. Say that again. Yes, I am making it right now. One more time. Yes, I am making it right now.
Sunshine.
The Ready, Set, Go show is part of the Possibilities podcast platform.